Thanks for being here, everyone. And seeing as this is a meditation group, we will start with some meditation. So you just find any way to sit or to be that feels good for about 15 or 20 minutes here. And the theme of this evening is a topic called samadhi, which is first like concentration or like collectedness of mind. And so this is always a foundation of kind of the style of meditation we do here. And part of the balance of this style of practices is a balance between being alert, interested, but also relaxed. So seeing what that can feel like in a posture as well, where upright if that's possible for the body, but also a sense of relaxation, softness. And you can close your eyes if that feels good for you. Or you can also just like rest your gaze at the floor. We have this collective center where you can just rest your gaze if that feels good too. I always like to start with just a few longer, slower, deeper breaths, just at your own rhythm, your own speed. Recognizing that this is Tuesday evening, middle of a work week. And the body can hold some tension sometimes, so really just letting go of anything that's not needed. And then whenever you feel ready, just letting the breath find a natural rhythm. Of allowing the body to breathe itself in a sense. Letting go of any control, letting go of having to be anyone, letting go of having to present any particular way. And letting your guard down if that's possible. Noticing where the breath is most prominent for you. And that could be a location, or it could be just kind of a wide sense of the body breathing. And simultaneously, we're just allowing the thinking mind to fall to the background of experience. So not pushing it away, not trying not to think, but really prioritizing the body and the breath and the here and the now. Staying with this rhythm of the breath, we're going to go through a process of softening, starting at the top of the head, relaxing any tension in the scalp or the forehead. And the thinking mind, letting the muscles of the brain relax. What does it feel like for the eyes to relax on the sockets? And for the jaw as well. Noticing how this can open up kind of the airflow through the nose. And scanning backwards, letting the shoulder blades come together. Seeing if it's possible to drop a little bit of tension out of the shoulders. And feeling the weight of the arms and the hands. And I'm noticing gravity. Allowing the energy of the body to kind of settle downwards. Softening the muscles of the chest, the heart area. breathing through the torso, softening the stomach and the lower belly. Kind of just allowing the body to have some breathing room. Feeling the contact points with the cushion, with the mat. And relaxing and breathing down into the legs, the upper legs. Down through the knees, the calves, the shins. All the way down through the feet and the toes. Spending a minute really connecting to this lower half of the body. You can even visualize each inhalation bringing oxygen into the bloodstream, down through the legs. So much of daily life sometimes can be from the waist up or even the neck up. So much cognitive demand and work. So what does it feel like to really connect to this lower half of the body? And coming to a whole body awareness. So what would it feel like to be just aware, kind of with a wide awareness from the top of the head to the bottom of the feet? And really placing the attention now really fully on the breath. And noticing what is a way of paying attention to the breath which is conducive to steadiness? And what's a way of breathing that's conducive to relaxation, to calm? And then staying with this rhythm, so staying with the full length of the inhalation, noticing the slight pause, the full length of the exhalation, slight pause. Almost as if this is really the only thing that matters right now. And the mind, of course, will want to wander off every now and then. And so the practice is just this gentle return, releasing and returning. Sati, the Pali word for mindfulness, literally means to remember. So just remembering your intention. Noticing the quality of the effort in the mind right now, too. Is there any striving energy that can be let go of? Or on the opposite end, is there maybe a little too lax? Finding that nice balance where the mind can be both alert and open and soft. And rather than paying attention to thoughts when they come through, really noticing the quality of awareness, of mindfulness, in the space in between. This awareness is not something we have to do, but rather it's something that is coming through us, happens all on its own. And it can be deeply restful to allow the mind to be rooted in awareness. So noticing any joy, any release that might be happening in the mind. And using that to further support the concentration. Maybe there's a sense of uplift, or a sense of relief. Or really a sense of this mind being open and spacious. Part of this practice is noticing what feels good. And leaning into that. one way of balancing, striving, or over-efforting in meditation is to invite in contentment, patience. Whatever is happening right now is good enough. When the mind releases from expectations, it can find peace with how things are. For these last few minutes, just seeing if the mind can weave a thread of continuity through the breath. Doesn't matter what the mind thinks. It doesn't matter if there's maybe an uncomfortable feeling. Just seeing if it's possible to stay fully present. Riding the waves of the breath. What would it feel like to let go completely in this moment? May any goodness that comes from this practice, may it be shared beyond these walls. May it contribute to the sanity, to the mental and spiritual health of this community. May it be for the benefit, for the welfare of all beings, those who are struggling, those who may not have the time or the privilege to meditate. May this practice be for the welfare and benefit of all. the other thing I always like to encourage is just this kind of continuity of mindfulness, noticing kind of the momentum of the mind from this even 20-minute meditation, and seeing if it's possible to kind of sustain that. So this is going to be the last talk in a series we've been doing on what's called the Eightfold Path, which was kind of branches of Buddhist practice, I guess you could say. And I'm going to be talking about what's called samadhi, or concentration, or unification of mind, collectedness. And this is kind of one of my personal favorite topics. I think it's part of what got me into meditation at the beginning. I don't think I had a word for it. I just knew that something felt good to sit down and do nothing but breathe for a little bit. And it's also said that through just the simple practice of sustaining mindfulness on the breath, that the entire kind of path of liberation can unfold from this really simple practice. And it's also what the Buddha said was his main practice when he would go out in these long retreats. He would always tell people, if people ask what I'm doing, tell them I'm practicing mindfulness of breathing, I'm practicing samadhi. And one of the Buddhist suttas, there's this quote that I really love. It says, "The purpose of wise concentration is for the sake of knowledge and vision of things as they truly are." So I just really appreciate that reflection, that there's something that happens when the mind settles down and becomes collected, that there's a clarity that can kind of arise in the mind, an ability to see things a bit more clearly and greater focus. So that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about today, and kind of the wholesome intention that goes kind of into that and behind it. And then I'm going to talk about what are called the 5 jhanic factors, which are kind of like little tools, ways to kind of support practice to develop concentration. I think they're really practical. I always try to keep this group in that realm. So there's a lot of things that can get a mind into kind of a flow state, but not all of them are necessarily like wholesome or beautiful. Olivia and I just got done watching the show The Day of the Jackal. If anyone's seen it, it's about a very skilled sniper. And I mean, it's a very good show. But part of what's beautiful is watching him kind of get into this zone. I mean, he is murdering people, so it's totally fucked up. But so we could say that's maybe an unwholesome form of focus, right? Getting really into this, the mind has to become very clear to be able to do that. This is not necessarily onward leading towards liberation in alignment with Buddhist teachings, though. And then also, of course, there's drugs, there's alcohol, which can kind of maybe clear the mind temporarily in some ways, but ultimately doesn't really contribute to the long-term welfare of the mind. So samadhi is said to be kind of a wholesome means of clearing the mind. And I really want to make the argument that it's really one of the most worthwhile investments of time. And the first reason why being that it's quite sustainable. It's something that one can do every day. You don't necessarily even have to be at home on the cushion to be able to do it. It can be done while sitting on the couch, driving in the car, whatever feels conducive to you. And while things like drugs can provide a temporary relief, again, not for the long-term really healing that I feel like this practice can have. And I think even other practices that I have, like running, for example, which I really enjoy doing, it has its limits for me. My body starts to get worn down at a certain point. It might get me in a bit of a focus, but I find that just paying attention to my breath is quite sustainable, actually. And the other, I would say maybe the main argument here is that I think really developing focus and collectedness of mind, it can impact every other area of life. So there's this kind of cumulative effect from mindfulness of breathing when it's done over time. For example, if I practice this in the morning when I wake up, develop some degree of focus or concentration, when I'm on my way to work, if I'm listening to the news, I can have a greater ability to listen to that without getting too thrown off by it, particularly right now where I think the news can be filled with constant surprises. Having some degree of stability allows me to be able to meet that a little bit easier. And then moving forward, going through the day, being in conversation and communication, being able to stay present and listen to somebody. This is all, there's a cumulative effect from practicing just with the breath. It can transcend that and allow us to stay with other things and be more present for people in our lives at work. I had to go back to school to finish a degree, and in my early 20s when I was in college, I was not too good at staying focused. And I went back at 35, and I had been meditating for a couple years, and I really noticed how helpful that was, particularly watching when I'm trying to do something when the mind starts wandering off and bringing it back, noticing that kind of, almost like flexing a muscle, had become easier over time. So it really trains the mind not to get swept into the past or the future, and I think can unlock this deep presence of mind that really feels really like home, something that's not contrived, something that feels very natural, something that's already there, that's just being uncovered. So that's my little sales pitch of why it's worthwhile. And I just wanted to share some practical thoughts on how to cultivate it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what are called the 5 jhanic factors. And this is kind of like, you could say like a little bit of a toolkit, things to help support the mind to develop collectedness, concentration. And the first 2 of these are what are called vitakka and vichara. And so vitakka is this placing the attention on the breath, something that you've probably done every time you've meditated, but maybe never had this fancy Pali word for it. So placing the attention, and then the vichara is sustaining the attention, is staying with the rhythm of the breath. Really fundamental aspects of mindfulness of breathing. And so I kind of wanted, as I'm saying this, to offer an invitation to try it as I'm speaking, noticing what it feels like to bring the attention to the breath and to stay with it. One of the first things that I notice is it feels like it starts to untangle my mind from preoccupations. Gives the mind something to do in the present moment. Here, stay with this. And in that placing and in sustaining, the mind can start to release a little bit. One of my favorite teachers, Ajahn Sucitto, talks about kind of lingering with the breath. That so much of this practice is kind of learning to stay with something that isn't really flashy or exciting, but has great benefit for the mind. And so doing this in meditation has benefits that can translate into daily life. Particularly, as I was saying earlier, this kind of returning and sustaining can be so helpful, whether it's at work or in a conversation. The more the mind flexes that in meditation, the easier it is to notice in daily life when the mind is starting to venture out, for it to naturally kind of come back. So the encouragement is to kind of just notice these, play with them, and in particular notice how they can change from something that's practiced as a state, kind of in a meditation, and that can turn into a trait, where the mind over time has this, becomes easier to stay with things. And so the next 2 are called piti and sukha. Piti means kind of like happiness or interest, and sukha is more of like contentment or ease. So different forms kind of like of happiness or joy that can arise in meditation. And these are said to be deeply supportive. The breath just in and of itself could maybe get dry or boring, but when the mind starts to take in kind of the quality of contentment, there can be this spark in the mind where it starts to have a greater interest in the practice. So that's piti, this first one. There's kind of this, the joy of interest is often how it's described. There can be like an uplifting quality or an energizing quality to it. And one of the reasons I wanted to go around the room at the beginning and just consider something which sparks your interest is because I think there's a similar thing that can happen in meditation. For me, I know when there's a book that I'm really enjoying reading, like I can just see that book and want to pick it up, like it has this kind of pull, a little bit of a spark to it. And I think the same thing can start to happen with a meditation practice. And if you have a setup or a place at home where you like to sit, developing some sort of a relationship can help start to kind of spark that interest, the kind of joy of sitting down to meditate. And then sukha, on the other side of this, is kind of the happiness of contentment. So I was encouraging this in the meditation when we started, noticing how it feels when the mind starts to settle into the meditation, when there's a little bit of release, when there's a little bit of relief that's happening, and when the mind has a bit of a lighter load. It's a way of almost like a reward system. The mind starts to see the benefit of staying collected, of staying with something. And so rather than being an escape from reality, it's actually a deeply tuning into what's present, to being here. And I really believe that this kind of contentment is something that the human mind just naturally yearns for. And that contentment, I'm coming through the lens of Buddhist meditation, it's not a Buddhist thing. It's just a human quality. The quality of rest, the kind of parasympathetic nervous system. I think it's comes with a sense of safety and peace and something that's really reliable for the mind. And I think taking that in can help support the desire to even want to meditate in a way. There's these beautiful metaphors for these stages of concentration that can unfold. And I wanted to share, they're called the 4 jhanas, and they're pretty well known as like an unfolding kind of progression that takes as the mind starts to deepen into meditation. And the 2nd jhana is said to be filled with this joy and happiness and release. So maybe closing your eyes as I'm saying this and kind of visualizing this metaphor within. It says, just as a lake with water welling up from beneath and no inflow from the east, the west, the north, or the south would be filled with cool, clear water. Even so, the practitioner permeates and pervades their body with the rapture and the pleasure born of concentration. So I really love that image of this lake which is welling up from within, from below. And I think there's something to that energetically too, even staying with the breath. And, as the energy of the body starts to settle, there can be this kind of each in-breath kind of bringing in a sense of ease and uplift to the body. And as I was kind of reflecting on these two things, piti and sukha, there's this kind of interest and then this reward, and my psychology mind was sparking. It's like, oh, this kind of sounds like dopamine, right? If you're not familiar with dopamine, it has a few aspects to it. Part of it being the interest or motivation to want to do something. And then also there's the reward quality of dopamine, the release when there's a sense of reward or accomplishment. And so I did a little bit of digging, since there's like 30 years of mindfulness studies now. And sure enough, there's quite a bit about dopamine particularly, and concentration. There was a study in 2002, and they did some brain scanning to show that dopamine levels increased by about 65% in experienced meditators compared to when in a resting state. So kind of amazing. As the mind gets more concentrated, there is some kind of neurotransmitters being released in the brain to kind of support this joy and this happiness that's happening. And meditation has also been linked to improved attentional control, greater ability to stay focused, to stay with something. And there's conjecture that this is possibly due to increased dopamine activity in the prefrontal cortex, which is associated with focus and with motivation. And also some studies suggest that long-term meditation practice over years can increase dopamine receptor sensitivity, making individuals more naturally motivated and less dependent on external rewards. So really using that kind of motivating quality of dopamine to develop this internal kind of reward system and a loop of well-being, which is really not dependent on anything else. Okay, and so the last one of these is called ekagata, which means one-pointedness of mind or unification. So sometimes this is interpreted as like focusing on a point, but I haven't really found that helpful personally, like a kind of more of a narrow focus. And a lot of other teachers that I follow talk about this more as like the mind focusing on a single theme. Like I said earlier in the meditation, almost like there's just one thing happening right now. It doesn't have to be fixed on a small point, but can just be like the whole body breathing and the mind immersing into that. And there can be this thing that happens where at a certain point, the egoic mind kind of slips away and there's something called absorption, which starts to happen where the doer kind of slips away and there's something more effortless that starts to unfold. So the encouragement is just to be kind of curious about that in your meditation practice, noticing when there's this kind of effortless quality that starts to unfold in the practice and leaning into that. So simultaneously, what's happening as the mind is getting more focused, it's releasing some of its fixed patterns. Like, what are the patterns in your own mind that the mind just keeps wanting to go back to over and over and over and over again? I'm a therapist and I have a lot of clients curious about mindfulness, but they often ask me why, what's the purpose or what's the point of it? And I think that's one of the most directly beneficial things that can happen is increased sense of agency over what the mind is doing. Every time the mind returns, it's exercising that sense of agency. It's saying, right now, actually, we're just going to be doing this. So these are all just practices, tools to kind of cultivate samadhi, concentration. And as I was reflecting on this, rather than this being kind of a process of accumulation of like all these extra things that I have to do, in a lot of ways, I think the deepening of concentration is more of a falling away. As the mind starts to release from some of its preoccupations, it kind of makes room for this kind of effortless form of concentration to start to arise. And as they go through these stages of concentration, this is kind of what they talk about. The placing and sustaining, for example, returning to the breath, staying with the breath, even that can start to fall away after a while because the mind is just fully there. It's just fully with the breath. And even the kind of uplift or the joy or the interest can start to settle into something much more equanimous over time. And the mind can start to get a glimpse of something which is really cool, unfabricated. This is pointing in the direction of liberation in Buddhist teachings, of nirvana, nibbana, depending on your language preference, also called the deathless. So I'm just going to wrap with a quote here, and then we're going to open it up for some discussion on how this is landing. This is from Aya Kema, a monastic, I believe, in the Thai forest tradition. She says, if the whole universe can be found in our own body and mind, this is where we need to make our inquiries. We all have the answers within ourselves.